All right, guys, so we're going to look at photosynthesis in depth. I have two videos. This is the first of the two. And so we're just going to title these notes. Objective. Oh, we can actually start off by, I'm going to make my little, whatchamacallit, Cornell notes. So you can start off by making your Cornell notes, kind of give yourself that margin. And I'm going to start off by titling these Objective 6 Continued. So you have your first Objective 6 notes, which are all about using models to explain the process of photosynthesis kind of in a big picture way, right? We're looking at how these inputs get into the plant, into the chloroplast, how they leave, where they go. But now we're going to look at kind of like the behind the scenes, what goes on in the thylakoid and the stroma to create these outputs. So that's where we are looking now. So Objective 6 Continued, and we're going to title it with our Objective 6 goal, which is to be able to use models to explain the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so that's why we're using like notes like this, because we have a lot of images, a lot of models that we're going to be working with. And so they look really complex once we're done drawing them, but if we work through the process of drawing them together, I think it helps us understand what they are showing versus just giving you a model and saying, look at all this complex stuff. What in the world is going on? So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start off by writing in the column what we are working on right now, which is stage 1. So there are two processes that occur in photosynthesis, the light-dependent reactions followed by the light-independent reactions. These are both part of the process of photosynthesis, part of what make those inputs become those outputs. So, two little parts. So we're going to start by answering what happens in the light-dependent reactions. So that's our goal in this area, what happens in the light-dependent reactions. I would recommend grabbing some colors if you have them around. I think it helps these diagrams so much, and I like to always either highlight or just box my vocabulary in pink so I remember what these key words and key terms are. So if you look at this word light dependent, you can probably assume this is the part of the process that needs light directly. Even though the second part of the process doesn't need light directly, without this process happening, it wouldn't happen. So technically all of photosynthesis needs light, but this one depends on it to get the reaction going. So we're going to break this up into a couple pieces. We're going to start off with the goal. So what is the goal of this step? This part of the process of photosynthesis, and that is to capture the energy from the sun and make two things. These are ATP and NADPH. Now, if you take AP Bio at some point, you'll go into depth about exactly what these do and how they work. But for our purposes, we're going to simplify it and say that these are forms of energy. So these two guys, we're going to call them energy carriers because they don't store energy for very long. They're just going to take the energy from the sun, from the light-dependent reactions, and they're going to carry it over to the light-independent reactions where it can be stored away as glucose. So they're kind of like the messengers. They're just transporting this energy from one part of the chloroplast to another. So energy carriers. They carry energy temporarily. Where does this process take place? So location is next. So the light-dependent reactions take place in the green part of the chloroplast, making sense why they're green, because they have chlorophyll there to capture the sun's light and reflect that green light. And these guys are called the thylakoids, as we have labeled before. So I think it's helpful just to draw like a little chloroplast here in green. And throw our thylakoids in there. Remember, we have the thylakoids, which are these individual discs, and then grana is the name for a stack of them, and the space kind of in between is the stroma. So we're going to label this the chloroplast, and we'll label one of these discs the thylakoid. So this is where the first step of photosynthesis takes place, the light-dependent reactions. So what are the inputs? We have two inputs of photosynthesis. We have water and carbon dioxide. We are only working with one of those inputs in this part of the process. So the input here is water. Water is going to be used in the thylakoids, okay? In addition to water, we're going to need the energy from light, so we can add that as well. Okay, so water and sunlight are going into the thylakoids for this portion of photosynthesis. What's going to come out? Well, we know we have two outputs of photosynthesis. Those are glucose and oxygen. But what comes out of this portion of the process is oxygen. And oxygen is going to leave the plant after this portion. It's going to leave and go out into the atmosphere for humans to breathe in, or it might be used by the plant. But this is a byproduct, right? It's not really that important to the plant. It's going to go, it's going to leave. But we're also going to have two things produced. These are not the main products of photosynthesis. Why? Well, they're going to be used up in stage 2. So these are like temporary outputs that are made here. And that is the ATP and the NADPH. Our energy carriers are produced here. Okay, so they're not just existing. They have to take that light's energy and carry it over. So they're going to be made here. I'm going to take just like a blue pen, and I'm going to box water, sunlight, and oxygen to remind us that these are our main reactants and products of photosynthesis, as opposed to these guys, which are not part of like the main formula. Okay. And then lastly, this is kind of the part that takes a little bit of writing. We have the overview, and then we can get into our picture. So just an overview of what happens in this process. We could go way more into depth like you will if you take AP Bio, but for now we're going to just write it in 3 small steps. The first step is that the chlorophyll in the thylakoid, and it's in the thylakoid membrane, like that outer layer, is going to capture the light from the sun. Number 2, light energy that is captured by the chlorophyll, that light energy is going to split our input, water, into pieces. Now, in addition to splitting this water, this H2O, into H and 2 oxygen molecules that are separate and floating around, it's also going to release some electrons, which have that light energy in them. So the energy goes from the sun into the chlorophyll, into these electrons, and these electrons are going to go into NADPH, an energy carrier. So light energy splits water, which releases from that water molecule energized electrons and oxygen and hydrogen. Okay, so here's our oxygen. I'm gonna just kind of show you. This is our oxygen. That oxygen is going to leave. I'm gonna make a little arrow from the oxygen and say leaves plant. Okay, goodbye. But these electrons, they're going to do some other things. So here it is. So number 3, energy from electrons is stored in ATP and NADPH. So they're going to be stored directly in NADPH. With ATP, there's a little bit of a process that occurs with these hydrogen ions and a couple of more things, even more behind the scenes, but we're going to go with that. And it's going to be stored as chemical energy. we're taking this light energy, and here it is as chemical energy, which will be stored away, we know, in glucose eventually. So where do these ATP and NADPH go? Well, the ATP and NADPH are going to head, so they're sent to the stroma for the light independent reactions. Okay, so again, we have water coming in here. The energy from light splits it apart, and the electrons carry that energy from light into ATP and NADPH, which are going to take that energy over to the stroma for the rest of the reactions to occur. Oxygen leaves at this point. So we've made one product, and we're trying to transfer that energy to another part of the chloroplast to be used. So what I'm going to have you now do is a little drawing. Okay. So in this space right here, we're going to draw a small little chloroplast with the thylakoid. Okay, so there's all of our little thylakoids in their granum, the stacks. And we're going to zoom in on one little thylakoid. Okay, so we're going to blow it up right here. We're going to label this the thylakoid. And we need to add a couple of things. So we're going to start off with our major inputs coming into the thylakoid. First, we're going to add sunlight up here. So we're throwing an arrow showing that the sunlight is moving into the thylakoid. It's going to be captured by that chlorophyll. Okay, draw a little sun. And I always like to show energy by highlighting in yellow, or you can use that symbol. I'll do both here in case you don't have yellow or a color, but using this symbol to show there is energy in this area. Because we want to follow that energy. Where is it going? How does photosynthesis rearrange molecules to move this energy into different forms? The other thing we want to do is add some water coming in here. Oh, I just got marker on my hands. Okay. So again, water is an input of the light-dependent reactions, and so we want to show that it's coming in with an arrow in. I'm going to write the word water, remind myself that the formula for water is H2O. We have 6 water molecules for each time photosynthesis occurs. And I'm going to also write from the xylem to remind myself that this is how the water got to the chloroplast, from that xylem. Now we know that when these two things come in, what comes out of here, which of our major products comes out is oxygen. So go ahead and write oxygen. We're going to end up with 6 oxygen molecules, O2. And where does that go? We know this goes to the atmosphere. Okay. Next, we want to talk about what's going on inside. So this is like the major stuff that's happening. But what's going on inside? So I'm going to draw a water molecule. I have oxygen connected to 2 little hydrogen. And that's what water molecules look like. I'm going to draw like a little line to show that this light energy is hitting it. So I'll use my little energy symbol. And then I'm going to show that what happens when the energy hits this is we end up with oxygen, hydrogen, notice how they're not connected anymore. Maybe even make them more spaced out than mine so you can see that they're not connected. And this oxygen is going to leave and head to the atmosphere. Okay. What is going on with the electrons that pop out is they're going to be transported to another part of the chloroplast. So I'm going to draw an arrow pointing down. And I'm going to add in a little electrons. You'll see electrons symboled as E-, and you can, do your little energy symbol here or highlight. I'll do both for you. because these electrons carry the sun's energy. And these electrons, they're nice and energized now. And where do they go? Well, they're going to go into building 2 energy carriers. They're going to be stored away in 2 energy carriers called ATP and NADPH. Okay, so I am going to give them the little energy bubble because they now have energized electrons stored inside of them. So this is where our energy is going. And these are headed to stage 2 in the stroma. Energy going to the stroma for, and I'm just going to write the LIR, light independent reaction. So there is our little model. Again, we zoomed into a single thylakoid. This thylakoid has chlorophyll in its membrane that can capture the sun's light, and that sun's light is going to split water into oxygen and hydrogen ions, releasing some energized electrons stored in ATP and NADPH. These are going to carry those energized electrons to the stroma for the light-independent reactions. In the meantime, oxygen happens to be made too and is released into the atmosphere. Okay, the last thing I want you to do here is label this drawing with light-dependent. They need light or else none of this could happen. Reactions. And box that in, and you have a nice little model of these reactions. All right, go ahead and watch video 2 now. New page, new stage.